There is a kind of comfort that feels good at first. You have your routine. You know what to expect. Nothing is really going wrong. You wake up, go to work, take care of your responsibilities, come home, and do it all again tomorrow. And you tell yourself, I'm fine. But every now and then, something inside you reminds you that you're not doing everything you're capable of doing. There is something you have been putting off. Maybe it's a dream. Maybe it's a change you know you need to make. Maybe it's something God has been placing on your heart for a long time. And you keep saying, I'll do it eventually. When things settle down, when I have more money, when I feel more confident, when I'm ready. But what if comfortable has become your excuse for staying where you are? That's what I want to talk about today. Because sometimes the biggest thing standing between you and your next season isn't a closed door. It's the fact that you're perfectly comfortable standing where you are. Let's be honest. We like comfort. We like knowing what tomorrow is going to look like. We like predictable. We like having our bills paid, our routine established, our little corner of the world under control. And there's nothing wrong with that. God isn't asking you to live in constant chaos. You need rest. You need quiet. You need time to breathe. Jesus understood that. There were times when he stepped away from the crowds. So this isn't about becoming exhausted, trying to prove yourself. It's about something different. It's about recognizing when comfort has stopped being rest and started becoming avoidance. Because you can be comfortable and still be unhappy. You can be comfortable and still feel empty. You can be comfortable and know deep down that you're supposed to be doing something different. And sometimes we know it. We just don't want to deal with it. Think about something you've been putting off, not something someone else told you to do, something you know. Maybe you've been thinking about going back to school. Maybe you've wanted to start something of your own. Maybe you've been wanting to change careers. Maybe there's a habit you've known for years that you need to let go of. Maybe you've been feeling God pulling you towards something, but you've been afraid to take it seriously. And every time the thought comes up, you find a reason to push it away. I don't have enough time. I don't know enough. What if I fail? What if people laugh at me? What if I start and it doesn't work? Those are real fears, but sometimes we give those fears so much authority that they start making our decisions for us. And that's when you have to stop and ask yourself, am I actually unable to move forward? Or have I just become afraid to leave what I know? Because those are two very different things. This is something I think we don't talk about enough. Fear doesn't always sound like fear. Sometimes it sounds responsible. It says, just wait a little longer. Maybe now isn't the right time. You need to think about it more. You should probably stay where you're safe. And sometimes those things are true. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes you're not waiting for God's timing. You're waiting until you can guarantee that nothing will go wrong. And you can't. There is no version of life where you get a guarantee that you won't fail, get disappointed, make mistakes, or have to start over. At some point, you have to trust God enough to move without knowing exactly how everything is going to turn out. Hebrews 11:1 reminds us that faith involves trusting what we cannot yet see. That's difficult, because most of us would rather have the whole plan before we take the first step. But God doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you get enough light for the next step. Not the next 10 years, just the next step. Think about Peter walking on water. Jesus told him to come. Peter stepped out of the boat. Now the boat wasn't necessarily a bad place. It was familiar. It was stable. He knew how to stay in a boat, but Jesus was asking him to do something he had never done before. And Peter had a choice. Stay where it was familiar, or step into something that required faith? That's where many of us are. We're sitting in our boats, and we're asking God for something different while refusing to leave what's familiar. We want a new season without having to change anything. We want growth without discomfort. We want confidence without taking risks. We want the outcome, but we don't want the process. But growth doesn't usually work that way. Maybe you're listening to this and thinking, but I don't even know where to start. That's okay. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be. You don't have to reinvent yourself completely tomorrow or next week. You don't have to quit everything. You don't have to make some dramatic announcement. Start smaller. If you've been talking about going back to school, research the program. If you've been wanting to start a business, learn something about the industry. If you've been putting off applying for a new job, update your resume. If you've been wanting to get healthier, start with one better decision today. If God has placed something on your heart, pray about it honestly. Then do what you can with what you have. That's it. One step, then another. Sometimes we become overwhelmed because we're trying to see the entire staircase before we're willing to take the first step. You don't need the entire staircase. You need the next step. And I want to say this because someone needs to hear it. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to slow down. You are allowed to have a season where you don't accomplish everything on your list. Your value isn't determined by how productive you are. Please don't turn this message into another reason to beat yourself up. That's not the point. The question isn't, am I doing enough? The question is, am I avoiding something I know I need to face? There's a difference. Rest says, I need to breathe so I can keep going. Avoidance says, I don't want to deal with this, so I'll stay here. One restores you. The other slowly convinces you that staying stuck is easier. And sometimes, staying stuck does feel easier until you realize you've been there for 5 years. Here's the uncomfortable part. Comfort isn't free. Sometimes it costs you opportunities. Sometimes it costs you growth. Sometimes it costs you experiences you were supposed to have. And sometimes it costs you the chance to find out what you're actually capable of. Imagine looking back years from now and realizing the thing you were most afraid of never even happened. You didn't fail. You didn't get rejected. You didn't embarrass yourself. You simply never tried. That can hurt more than failure, because at least failure teaches you something. Never trying leaves you wondering, what could I have become? What could I have built? Where could I have gone? What would have happened if I had just started? Don't let that be your story. Maybe you've spent the last few years simply surviving. Maybe you lost confidence in yourself. Maybe life didn't turn out the way you expected. Maybe you've gotten used to putting your own dreams aside while taking care of everyone else. And if that's you, I'm not here to tell you that you wasted your life. You didn't. But you don't have to spend the next 5 years doing exactly what you've been doing for the last 5. Something can change. It doesn't have to happen overnight. But it can begin. One decision, one conversation, one application, one class, one prayer, one step. And sometimes that first step is simply admitting, I'm ready to stop hiding behind comfort. You don't need to become fearless. You just need to stop allowing fear to make every decision for you. There will probably always be a reason to wait. There will always be something you don't know. There will always be a possibility that things won't go exactly as planned. But there is also a possibility that they will. There is a possibility that the thing you're afraid to start could become one of the most meaningful things you've ever done. There is a possibility that the version of yourself you've been waiting to meet is on the other side of one uncomfortable decision. So don't throw away your peace. Don't rush yourself. Don't compare your life to someone else's. Just be honest about where you are. And if you know you've been hiding in comfort, ask God for the courage to move. Not 10 steps, not the whole journey, just the next one. Because sometimes purpose doesn't arrive with a dramatic moment. Sometimes it begins quietly. With you getting up one morning and finally saying, I'm going to stop waiting for perfect conditions. I'm going to trust God and take the next step. And maybe that's where things begin to change. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you finally decided that staying comfortable was no longer worth the cost. You have more life to live. So don't let fear convince you that where you are is all there is. Take the next step and trust God with what comes after it.